Up next on Inside the SCCA, it's Super Tour time again. Make their head drop. Welcome to this episode of Inside the SCCA. Brian Bielanski here, and we have got ourselves a great show this time. I think this is the third time we have done this, and I've got two of my good friends here. And, Happy New Year, Mr. Gregg Ginsberg. That crazy MFer at the bottom is Gregg Ginsberg, and right above him is Brandon Kaczmarek. This is our 2025 Super Tour preview show. Welcome, gentlemen. Well, welcome, guys.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Brian. Great to be with you.
Good to have you on the show. Usually I do a preview show before each race, talking about each race. And last couple of years, I think I've done that and this show for Sebring. But we're going to do just this one for Sebring. I think most people know which way to go left and right at Sebring. So we got some exciting stuff ahead for the Super Tour broadcast. You wouldn't know it by some of the stuff we watch, I guess.
Maybe that's something we should cover during your show, Brian.
I remember seeing some highlights last year that, never mind not going left or right, couldn't go in a straight line either.
Well, there is that. Oh. There is that.
Can we forget that GT1 race?
No, probably not. This is Inside the SCCA, presented by RaceSchool.com, and let's get right to it, folks. I guess the best place to start, guys, is that the Super Tour race season is going to look somewhat different this year. Some changes from the club have come down the pike. Some have been rather significant. Others have been not as significant. Everyone has their opinions on whether they're the right changes or the wrong changes. I don't think that's worth getting into too much here because the changes are here whether we like them or not. But it is going to look like a different race this year, right, Greg?
Yeah, indeed. A lot of changes, and I think this is going to be. There was a lot of upheaval, we'll say, in the classing for the Super Tour and national SCCA road racing in general, and we're going to see, unfortunately, I think, going to see some different groupings, including a big change, and the biggest change I think that most people will notice is that for most Super Tour events. We had two open wheel groups, a large open wheel group and a small open wheel group. And unfortunately, for the majority of the Super Tour season, we're not going to have that small open wheel group joining us this season. We know that already one of the three classes in that triumvirate of Formula V, Formula F, and Formula 600 was not going to be attending the 2025 National Championship runoffs at Road America, that being Formula 600. And because of some of the oversubscription of some of the other classes in the previous year, the decision was made, rather than add another run group to what was already a pretty tight schedule during the course of a weekend, unfortunately that small Formula group, the Formula Fs, Formula Vs, and the Formula 600s, with the exception, I believe, of Buttonwillow and Portland, will not be part of the Super Tours. Super Tour events this season.
Yeah, we should also remember that the Formula 600 portion of this really doesn't have much to do with the changes. They had subscription issues, and as the SCCA rulebook is written, they didn't have enough drivers last year at the events, and that's why they're not part of the runoffs this year. Taking Formula F and Formula V out of the majority of the Super Tours is part of the new changes, And that is the situation with that. The club has added a bonus majors for those two classes as a replacement for those races. So for the rest of the country, that's how Formula F and Formula V are going to qualify for the runoffs this year. But so yes, that's one thing we're going to see very visibly different about our schedules for most of the races this year, is that there won't be those classes, and that is that situation. And what that does is it makes room on the schedule to take some of the other classes, which were very highly subscribed, and get them into groups of race groups with less cars in them, so that it will hopefully, less cars on the track, keep us from having a little less issues, and keep us with more green flag racing. That's my take.
Yeah, in a phrase, it relieves a little bit of pressure. Right, both from the weekend schedule as a whole, the operation as a whole, and the individual run groups themselves, right? We had a couple of groups last year. We were packing a lot of cars and a lot of classes onto reasonably short tracks and trying to make the best of it. And in some cases, it did actually impact the individual races. We had a number of instances where, slower classes got in the way of faster classes, somebody not looking in the mirrors. When I say got in the way, you know what I mean.
Right. It's just
trying to poke the bear here, but it did impact race results on a number of occasions. And so this helps to relieve a little bit of pressure by allowing us to split run groups a little bit differently. Also, we had a number of cases last year, NOLA, Road Atlanta, June sprints, and possibly also one other, where we literally didn't have enough hours in the day to run the races we needed to run. And this takes some of that chaos and some of that pressure, and just allows for a little bit more room for the schedule to run as designed, for the weekends to run as designed, and to let people not be quite so on edge or on eggshells as we progress through these what are normally very unpredictable days anyway.
Right. It allows for the schedule to be more equitably distributed between the groups and the classes. And never have I talked to an SCCA racer who said, I want more classes in my race group. I've never heard that. I've been doing this for 35, 40 years now, and I've never weard anybody say, we're going to do multi-class racing, and maybe they could push 2 or 3 more classes into my race group. That's never been anything any driver has ever said. Yeah. So when you get a chance to spread the pain out a little bit, spread the wealth out. I shouldn't call it pain. We've got a lot of cars. That's wealth. Spread the wealth out amongst the groups a little bit more, and hopefully that will, like you said, relieve the pressure, and we can keep more cars going in the right direction, keep the races green as much as possible, and get all these full races in.
You guys are going to talk a little bit more about the specifics. It's not necessarily my job, particularly as the producer. But one thing I would like to say before we kick off this little mini discussion here is that if you take a 30,000-foot view of the whole situation, right, especially which is literally what we do at DriversEye Live, is to take the broader view and to let people engage and watch and enjoy. With this situation in particular, it's not changing the end result. The end result for the Super Tour live streams and this particular preview that we're doing is that you're still going to get to watch awesome racing.
Yep,
right.
Exactly.
You're still going to get to follow the premier racing club racing organization, the top of that organization, with 10 times this year.
Yeah, with 8 or 9 races every single day. Yeah.
Right. You're relieving some of that pressure. These weekends are arguably going to flow a little bit more cleanly, a little bit more freely. And we're setting the stage for a season of tremendous unknown. Right. We are making so many little miniature changes that are going to have big impacts that we cannot understand. Right. Until we get to Sebring in just a couple of days' time. Right. We don't know exactly what this is going to look like. We don't know what a jumbled up big bore field is going to look like, or a DOT tire field is going to look like, right? So we get to, as these weekends progress, we get to answer some of these questions. We get new questions generated, and we're kind of going to walk through this 10 race schedule together, learning what the new face of the top of SCCA club racing is going to look like, in the hopes that when we get to the national championship runoffs in October, we have a little bit more clean picture of what the future of club racing holds for the SCCA. And I'm tremendously excited to step into this schedule with you guys.
Yeah, I kind of look at this year as I'm a bit of a foodie. And when you are creating a new recipe, you R&D it. You do a recipe for a little bit, and then you change it and you tweak it a little bit. I feel like we've kind of like have a new set of ingredients this year, and we're not quite sure what the end of the recipe is going to look like. And throughout our year, we're going to learn, the club's going to learn, and they're going to take what the lessons are from this year. And I think we'll have a more better long-term picture view when we get to next year at Sebring, and we're sitting here having this exact same conversation, I hope, if they ask Greg and I back.
Yeah, and this change in run groups is probably the most concrete thing that we have going into the season. I really consider 2025 for the Super Tour and for SCCA majors and national racing as really being a year in transition, or a year of transition.
Absolutely.
We have with some of the changes in class structure, which are going to affect some of these different run groups. For example, the GT3 class is now what is going to be known as GT3U. And instead of racing with the normal larger GT cars like GT1 and GT2 and Touring 1 and American Sedan, they are now going to be grouped typically with STU in particular. They're going to be racing with STU, I think, all year.
Yes.
Because the plan is come 2026 that GT3U or GT3 and STU are going to be combined into a single class.
Right.
And so this GT3U is you're going to find the GT3 racers for the very first time racing their cars not on true slicks, but they're going to be on DOT tires. They're going to be running, I think, for the most part, about 150 pounds heavier than they had been required, or as had been their minimum weight in GT3 all these previous years. And this is going to give the racers, it's going to give the CRB, it's going to give us at the booth a very good way to judge what the racing is going to look like when that class combines.
Right.
And it's going to be very different, I think. And I really appreciate that is what's going to happen, as opposed to if we take a look at, and I think one of the unfortunate losses that we have here is GTL, which is going to regional only racing status. And what that means is come day one, and I guess, Brian, we can break down the wall here. We're recording this before the what is typically the tune-up for Sebring at Homestead, and Homestead is happening in just a couple of days. But racing for the very first time together, we've got national champions, past national champions in GTL, like Chris Bovis, like Peter Shadowin. They are going to be now racing in F production, which is where all of the GTL cars were reclassed. They're going to be racing against folks like Ken Kennard.
Right.
They're going to be racing against folks like Mason Workman. Ken Kennard was the 2023 national champion in F production. Mason Workman. We'll see if Mason takes advantage of the national champions exemption, where he technically doesn't have to qualify for the runoffs this year, but we'll see if he comes out. And it's going to be so neat to see all of the top racers in these different classes now, not with a year of transition, but forced to race against one another to qualify for the runoffs.
Yeah, it's absolutely the case, and we'll have one race under our belts at Homestead before you see this, so we'll be able to chat about that when we open up the Super Tour broadcast on Friday from Sebring, and we'll be able to share a little bit of what we learned at Homestead. I think Friday will be I always chuckle about us doing qualifying, because I always say to myself, who's watching qualifying? And then everybody shows up watching qualifying, and I'm always amazed by that. But this
qualifying, by the way.
This qualifying session on Friday at Sebring is going to be one you're going to want to tune into, because Greg and I are going to be able to talk about all the stuff we learned this past weekend at Homestead. So, and I think we'll learn a lot.
It's not just that. We're going to be learning in real time during those qualifying sessions as well, as will the CRB, as will anybody who needs to acquire data points from the cars and the drivers. They're going to be doing that in real time. Sebring is only the second weekend for this new rule set, and little adjustments are going to be made, no doubt. but the first qualifying session and the second qualifying session, which will be the first sessions streamed as part of the Super Tour weekend at Sebring, are going to be everybody in the paddock looking at timing screens, looking at the car's behavior on track, and trying to extrapolate as much as they can from that to predict, okay, what does the rest of the season look like based on these few data points, right? What are the things we know right now that we can project out through the rest of the year? And then we start to fill in the extra data points and we get something that's a little bit more cohesive. But those first few, that first day at Sebring, the first weekend at Sebring, and on towards Buttonwillow, which is whole other can of worms, being that it's a new track nobody will have raced on, or I guess raced on once by that point.
Right.
We're all going to be learning come Friday at Sebring in real time, Saturday in Sebring at real time, same thing through the weekend. And to me, that's just, the unknown is so exciting. And so exciting.
Agreed.
The other thing I'm excited about is, this is an engineering exercise for a lot of teams and drivers and crews out there. And seeing the teams evolve from Sebring down through towards Watkins Glen and the runoffs, and when the ones that do have to make the changes to adapt to a new class or bring new cars into their class, drivers are going to have to learn how to drive against a bunch of different cars they're not used to driving against. Teams are going to have to learn how to make their cars work in a class they weren't already, part of. And what they do at Sebring is going to be very different than what they're going to be doing in Watkins Glen, and then of course in the runoffs, and then into year 2 of all of this next year, 2025. So some are going to get it. Whenever they put when a new car in a new Pro Series, you've got some teams that immediately figure out how to make the system, and other ones aren't. So it'll be fun to see which guys and which teams and which gals figure it out fast, and which ones evolve to make their cars better to work and learn the new kind of the new world order. And I think that's really exciting as well.
Yeah, indeed. And, so, we talked about GTL joining the F production class, and there's one more category where we're seeing some very large changes in SCCA road racing in 2025, and that is in some of the fastest and highest tech cars that we have running, and that is in the prototype field, where for the past number of years we've had Prototype 1 and Prototype 2. Prototype 1 primarily with automobile engines, with Prototype 2 primarily in some cases with the same types of chassis, with the same chassis, but powered by motorcycle engines. For 2025, there is now one class, and it is P, and that class has some changes not only to drivetrains but also to braking systems, to aero that's allowed on these chassis, and so much was involved, I think, in getting some of the Prototype 2 cars to be able to conform to that new class. Prototype 2 is going to be racing in the Super Tour for this will be its swan song. They are not going to have a race at the runoffs this year. There is only going to be a P or prototype race at the runoffs, but I think the end goal for the majority of those P2 racers will be eventually to move their cars and get them configured to run in P, and we'll likely, starting at Sebring, see some racers that have already made that change, and it'll be interesting to see now how, with I think a much wider range of drivetrain types, how those race cars all race together. But again, very much that story about transition and change that we're seeing across SCCA Club Racing in 2025.
Absolutely. Anything else? What are we excited about this year besides the class changes and having to figure out how to make it work? Any other thoughts? I know the schedule has shaken up a little bit as far as the order of classes or order of the races, but we're not going anywhere new this year except for Buttonwillow. I'm excited because that's my home track. We are going to Buttonwillow, but we're not going to Buttonwillow this year. For the last, I'm going to guess 12 or 13 years, Cal Club has been trying to build the new racetrack, which actually now has a name. For a long time, it was called the New Track, and now that it's a thing and we're about to go racing on it, we decided to come up with a name for it, which I'm not happy about, by the way, the name. I wanted it to be the Kangaroo Rat Racetrack, but that's we'll talk more about that at Buttonwillow. But
it's now the Circuit of the California Desert. It's just CCD. Is that
it's
it?
Just now
the Brian Bielanski Memorial Circuit.
Memorial. Wait a second. Is there something I don't know? It is now called the Circuit at Buttonwillow. It's a brand new track. It is on the same grounds, right at the entrance of Buttonwillow, if you've been there before. And it is a really cool track, and it'll allow the club to run 2 events at the same weekend at the same time. And we're going to race on it a lot this year because it's brandy new, and we like brandy shiny new things. And that's where the Super Tour is going to race in February.
I think if I'm picking out one thing that I'm the most excited about, it's that new event or that new track at Buttonwillow. And it's not just because it's something different. Okay, we're not going to any new venues technically this year. But that track specifically, Brian, you've had more than a few looks at already.
I have.
It reminds me a little bit of Harris Hill.
Okay.
Down in Texas.
Down in Texas.
But it's like 50% longer, right? When you look at the layout of Buttonwillow, of the circuit at Buttonwillow, my head says under 2 miles, right? Like a Hallett type length.
Right.
And you pack a bunch of corners together and, it flows pretty well, but you're not really stretching the legs out. The track's 2.9 miles long.
Yeah.
It's got like 12 corners and it's almost 3 miles. These cars really finally have the opportunity to stretch their legs.
Yeah.
It's wider than the current circuit at Buttonwillow. It's faster than the current circuit at Buttonwillow. To me, it's everything you would want out of a brand new circuit. It's got camber, it's got elevation changes, and presumably extremely grippy pavement, fresh pavement to come with it.
One would think.
So looking forward to that weekend down there at Buttonwillow. We'll see what it looks like on camera. We don't know that yet. You'll have that answered for us, I guess, in a couple of weeks' time, Brian.
Yep.
With the majors there, but that is for me. That's pinpoint number one. Is let's go to Buttonwillow. Let's see what the track looks like. I hope we get some increased participation. Maybe people willing to come out, and if not, tow out there. Maybe rent some seats and check out the track with us together as part of the Super Tour. I'm also interested in the emergence of some of the new events we saw last year. NOLA, which was, I think, a joint event last year with Lone Star Region. I'm going to forget all the other regions. Very sorry, but they had great T-shirts anyway. That event had well over 200 cars. Yeah. So much so that we started running out of daylight trying to run them all. I think it was an enormous success, despite no longer being out at Circuit of the Americas. I'm really excited to see, given a little extra daylight and a little extra breathing room, what we can do in March when we go back to NOLA. And I'm really excited again about Mid-Ohio and a little bit of separation from Watkins Glen. So I think the Mid-Ohio and Watkins Glen back-to-back dates last year within 2 or 3 weeks of each other kind of cannibalized each other's events a little bit. And I wonder if spreading them out from mid-May to end of June is going to help encourage drivers to do both.
Right.
We've also already done the runoffs at Road America, so we don't necessarily – it's not an imperative that you go do the June sprints. It's a good idea, but not an imperative the way it was this year on that new pavement. So I'm excited to see if maybe we get a little bump back to Watkins Glen and if Mid-Ohio can continue to grow close up to 300 cars like we were at last year.
Yeah, and I think it should be noted that slot now between Mid-Ohio and Watkins Glen is actually going to be consumed by the June sprints. Yeah. That traditionally for years, the Watkins Glen majors and then Super Tour events were held at the end of June, and the sprints towards the very beginning of June. The last couple of years, they had swapped positions due to scheduling at those different tracks. But we see them go again. So the June sprints and the last event on the Super Tour is not going to be the last event before the runoffs at that very same track. Going back, Brian, there's one other big thing about the racing in the classes in 2025 that I'm looking forward to seeing, and it involves Spec Miata. Right. In 2024, SMX, which was a new class, one of the neat features, and I would call it a feature of the class, is that it had a tire limiting prohibit. prohibition on using new tires at every single session. There was a tire marking after the cars would come off track after the very first dry qualifying session, and the drivers would then be required to use those same tires to the second qualifying session and through the races themselves. In prior years, in Spec Miata, that was part of the supplemental regulations at a limited number of Super Tour events, I think back in 2023 and also 2022, but it had primarily in prior years been done under a gentleman's agreement with a lot of the racers. Right. This is actually something that is being written in for all of the Super Tour events this year for Spec Miata, and I think it'll keep down the cost, but I think more importantly is it much like you have to go and strategize during a race while you're behind the wheel of a car. This also is going to require you to work some strategy over the course of the entire weekend and make sure that the tires that you are running, that you start off those great Hoosier SM 7.5 tires that you start the weekend off with, that they are there at the end of a 35-minute race on Sunday afternoon. And in some tracks that are known for being very difficult for tire wear, that's going to be a challenge. And I think it just adds one more piece to the puzzle for what is undoubtedly one of the most competitive classes in SCCA road racing.
I think the answer is simple, Greg. You just go full send in qualifying and hang on for the 60 minutes or whatever you've got to spend on track.
And pray it rains. That way you can swap tires.
Yeah.
Exactly. What could go wrong?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and I think the two things that people don't think about too much is, well, one thing is that I think this also compresses the field together, which may or may not be a good thing. But I think that there are drivers who are consistently in the back half of the Spec Miata field, and part of the reason that they're in the back half is because they're not putting the new tires on all those sessions. And now they may be able to come up to be a top 20 car or a top 10 car because they're going to be having to deal with the same level of strategy as everyone else. And so people aren't
because they're going out on maybe they're going out on sticker tires for qualifying as opposed to going out on scrubbed in tires for qualifying. Correct. Knowing that they're going to use the stickers for the feature race or maybe for the Saturday race.
Or maybe the feature race for 2 or 3 weekends, whereas now they don't have to necessarily do that. The other thing I was going to say is, and I've talked about this on a different show, I think that this tire limiting rule is the future of the SCCA. I think that this will become, and I have no one's official has told me this, I've got no insider information, I'm just saying personally, if the tire limiting rule were to go across all of our classes for all of our weekends, I think that would be a huge benefit to all of the racers from a pocketbook standpoint. And quite frankly, the biggest reason people don't go racing is because what we do is expensive. And tires are the most expensive expense for a lot of our classes. So
I'll add one experiential note, I guess, or anecdotal note to that. Obviously, DriversEye Live covers a lot of endurance racing. Our friends over at the World Racing League allow us to cover their races as well. It's all DOT tires over there, right? And the progression in DOT tire technology, even since we started covering some of those races, has been massive.
Right.
Now, the progression in slick tire technology and racing tire technology has also been massive, but so have the costs. Right. So if you look at where tire tech is now versus where it was, let's say 30 or 40 years ago, you're doing similar lap times and getting similar performance out of a DOT 200 tread or a tire now as you would have been on a racing tire 30 or 40 years ago. And so are you really giving up that much in performance by running a cheaper tire, a more sustainable tire, or using a more sustainable tire rule to help make club racing itself more sustainable?
Right.
I'm totally in favor of that. Like you said, there's nothing official from the club to suggest that this is where it's going to go. But if you look at all of the evidence across 20 or 30 years now of motorsports and tire tech development, it seems likely and it seems like a healthy choice and a sustainable choice to head down that pathway. So excited to see what it means for Spec Miata this year. I think it was fascinating to watch during the SMX races last year.
Yes, it was.
Given
definitely.
that same rule. Really, really cool stuff. And I'm excited to see what that means for sort of the power structure at the top of what is arguably the club's most visible and most exciting class.
Yep, no question. All right, let's move on to talking about the broadcast. We've got some stuff that we're going to be doing this year. It's going to be a ton of fun. First off, I want to take an opportunity to thank all of the people who watch. And, the whole reason we do this is so that you folks at home can tune in and watch your friends and family and do that. And hopefully maybe some folks will find the SCCA who didn't know we were there. That's been evidenced by the people who come in the chat and like, why are we what is this? And the questions from the chat. There are definitely people finding us. Brendan, we had a really great first year. And we had an even better second year. What are the numbers? Tell us the numbers.
So this is a bit from memory,
okay.
But I've had to report it a couple times, so I think I've got it down pat now. First year, across 10 races, I think we totaled 173,000 viewers.
I think you're right.
For club racing.
Yes.
Which we felt pretty remarkable, especially given that the club was, transitioning to doing live video of amateur motorsports for the first time. There really wasn't necessarily a target set. We didn't know what the reach was going to be, what the engagement was going to be. And as we transitioned into year 2, we said, okay, here's what we think we can do with all of the resources, with all this knowledge gained from year 1. What can we get out of it? And in terms of viewership, which is the only true measurable that we can take out of the whole experience, we were up close to 30%. 29.4%, I think, ended up being the increase. Mike Cobb mentioned it in a President's Update back over the summer. 223,000, I think, ended up being our total across the 10 races last year, which was tremendous. And the engagement rose to go along with it. I think we had a tremendous year overall. I don't know that 30% year-on-year growth is sustainable, but it's a matter of it being fun to watch, engaging, and community-centric.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing we did exceptionally well 2023 into 2024. I hope that certainly that continues. The views are great, but obviously we want to be able to chat with the folks that, it's an extension of the track, and it's an extension of community is really what it's all about. So that's what I'm hoping for going into 2025. Never mind the technical upgrades and the little flashy bits, but that's the 2023 to 24 to 25 jump I'm looking forward to.
And Brendan, if I could just jump in for a second. There have, in the last couple of weeks on social media, I think there have been a couple of threads that I've seen and been a part of where, people ask, and in many cases, because they don't know that we have 230,000 people watching these Super Tour races over the course of a 10-week season, and they like to see the club, promote their product a little bit more. And the thing that I could tell every single person that is watching this podcast is when we're streaming these races on YouTube, the best way to promote these races, even while they're ongoing, when somebody goes and logs into YouTube and has shown a preference for motorsports and car type content, is for you to, one, put your eyeballs on the stream, but also engage with Brian and I. Brian and I are always in the chat. There's the area to put comments down below, all the different things that you can do as viewers that help with those secretive algorithms that YouTube uses in order to put content in front of new eyes. You can help us get these wonderful races in front of more eyeballs and more people, both on race days and after the races are over as well, and going into the next week and, over the course of an entire year.
And I would add to that, sharing the links during the races and after the races. If you're home and you drove in, the H production race, and it was you had a great race that you want people to know about, hit the copy and paste so that you can get the link and put it on your social media, even if it's Monday or Tuesday or whatever. The best megaphone that the club has are all of us. You know, if all 55,000 people who are members were to take and push that link out to their social medias, that is so much larger than the reach of the club itself, even with their social media numbers. Gregg has good social media, I have good social media numbers, but nothing like the collective of 65,000 members, or whatever the number is now, doing it themselves. And if everybody would get in the habit of sending that out as much as possible, that's also really, really huge for letting the world know what we do, because that collective reach, I would love to be able to find that number, because I bet you it is, if you were to look at it, it's probably in the definitely hundreds of thousands, if not over 1 million collective reach of the club members, and that would be fantastic.
I'll share with you a quick anecdote that I think is kind of an extension of what we do. Back in my college days, I was marshaling down here in Florida. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There are so many directions I can go with that, Brian, but the season hasn't started yet, and it's way more fun to do it to you in person.
Bring it.
Next week.
Okay.
Well, in, I guess, a day.
Exactly.
I definitely will, because it's the thing I look forward to most is teasing you. Yeah. Anyway, so back in my college days, I marshaled in the Central Florida region, made a bunch of trips down to Sebring and Homestead and Daytona and Road Atlanta, and really got to travel the Southeast on pro and club racing weekends. And inevitably, you end up with these short-staffed weekends where everybody says, hey, if you've got some time, invite a friend, bring them out to the track with you and let them experience what it is we do here. So I invited my college roommate down to a driver's school at Sebring in July on the short course. And? On paper, not a good move. He loved it.
Yeah.
We had a fantastic time. He was hooked, right? Even after we left school, we went our separate ways. He ended up staying in Daytona Beach area for a little while. He traveled up and down the Southeast, going out to marshal races, as hooked by the community as he was by the cars themselves. And I think these streams kind of serve as an extension of that, right? Yep. It's an opportunity to share what it is we do and what we've been gripped by with the Sports Car Club of America, and in a short 25 to 30 minute segment saying, hey, all my buddies are racing in the FE2 race, right, or whatever, right? You should tune in and check it out. And okay, it's 12 static cameras from around an otherwise fairly empty club, sometimes a club racing venue, sometimes a pro racing venue. But the racing is often tremendous. The passion that you guys bring, Brian and Gregg, is infectious. And if you have the opportunity to read, the comments and the threads that get posted by some drivers, some teams, some corner marshals, and to be a part of that community, or community by extension, that is the goal of what we're trying to do with the live stream. So that sharing that you guys are talking about, social media sharing, trying to drive numbers up so the YouTube algorithms catch a whiff of what we're doing. All of that is really just an extension of, hey, why don't you come flag for a weekend? But instead it's, hey, why don't you tune in for 30 minutes? Yeah.
The passion that we have is so infectious that the CDC has put out a public health directive warning people against watching our stream this year. But, anyway.
I've already built up the antibodies. So
Very good. Very good.
Yeah.
It's funny. You said invite, and that's something I've been pushing now for a couple of episodes. I'm putting out a challenge this year to all SCCA members. If every SCCA member, all 50,000 of them, invite 5 people to a race this year, that would be whatever the numbers are. I don't do math, but it's big. And that's just how we grow ourselves. It's same challenge. Invite 5 people to watch one of our streams. Same idea. It gets people out there to see what we do, and if you're old like Gregg and I, invite someone who's 20 years younger than you to the racetrack, or 20 years younger to you to watch a YouTube stream, because that will help us bring in some younger blood, and we need some younger blood to help us with our volunteers.
Listen, Brian,
and all that kind of stuff.
If I tried to do that, their parents would have to sign waivers, and it just gets messy with paperwork.
And then you'd have to register for a list.
Yeah.
So.
Oh gosh. Thank you for joining us, everybody. We'll see you again.
The final episode of the Inside the SCCA podcast.
God.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my.
And you said that there might be a couple little shiny, blinky things on the broadcast that we're going to do this year. Can we share, or are we just going to surprise people along the way?
I think it's more of a surprise. To some degree, it's a matter of finding little ways to add some polish and add some depth. We're not trying to change the world here.
Right.
DriversEye already does things a little bit differently to try and allow club racing live streaming to be sustainable. And in as much as we can keep the dollar figure sustainable, we try and maximize the resources that we're given to do cool things. So we'll see what that looks like along the way. Yes, it's a lot of rinse and repeat, but if we can add a little bit of polish, some new graphics and things like that, then we've made progress, and that's important too.
Let me do this, guys. Let me take a second and thank the people that helped me do this podcast and do that, and then we'll get back to our conversation. First off, I'm going to thank RaceSchool.com, Inside the SCCA, presented by RaceSchool.com. They're over my shoulder. Great folks out there. They have they do their schools mostly at Buttonwillow these days, but occasionally they go over to Willow Springs. They are one of the top schools here in California. They offer a full SCCA competition license school that, of course, you have to pass to get your comp license. You can't just go and they're just going to give it to you. Got to pass the school, and then they give you your comp license. Also, they have defensive driving schools, high-performance driving days, pretty much all the stuff that you expect a school to have, they have. But what they do a little bit differently is they have a whole ton of one-on-one instruction for their schools, and they have a different way of teaching, which I find fascinating. We did a podcast about it, so check that out. And if you're interested in doing a driver's school, want to get your license, go to RaceSchool.com. Also, Solo Performance Specialties. They are at most of the SCCA National Tour solo events. Dave and his group out there do a fantastic job supporting all of the solo competitors out there. And if you don't see them at an event, you can go to Solo Performance Specialties website. Their link is in the show notes. Also, we have Ray Esports. They are the official sim racing league of Inside the SCCA. We love racing with Ray Esports. Tons of SCCA racers are part of those events, and I feel like the racing's a little cleaner with his events because most of the racers are actual racers, and they kind of try to treat their sim racing like it's actual racing. Maybe I'm just making that up in my head, but that's how I feel they do things, so that's why I enjoy working with those folks there. Race Keepers, official in-car camera of Inside the SCCA. Every car in the Super Tour and majors needs a camera, and they have tools for that, and their cameras are very good at showing how slow I am when I'm racing, and that's always exciting as well. Lastly, our newest sponsor is William R. Pinterick and Associates. Dave Pinterick, a longtime SCCA racer. That is his financial planning and investment firm, and he is a big supporter of Inside the SCCA, and I thank him for being part of what we do. If you are looking for money management help, he is the guy to go to. His link is also in the show notes. All right, let's get right back to it, gentlemen. We are wrapping up the show. A couple of more things I want to talk about before we go, and I want to mention one of the things that I am excited about, and of course I just erased it from my screen. Stand by. Undo. Thank you very much. Many years ago, SCCA was the place you had to go if you wanted to take the step up into pro racing. It was a step on the ladder in general terms. Back in the 70s, 80s, early 90s, I felt like that had gone away a little bit, where the relevance of SCCA and the rest of the motorsports world had kind of taken a back seat a little bit. I feel like that's changing back a little bit right now. Had a long conversation with a guy who is a big time pro racer, and now he's got a new job. I'm teasing ahead without saying the name. He is going to be my guest on the first episode of season 5. I'm extremely excited about this episode. It's already been recorded, and we're going to have it out there, and you're all going to want to watch it. But one of the things we talk about is the SCCA helping get drivers up to the next level. A couple of examples of that right now. Connor Zilich is now a NASCAR driver. He started with us here at Spec Miata. Morgan Burkhart, he is now got another, just signed a 3-year deal to drive in the Michelin Pilot Challenge. Who the hell gets a 3-year deal as a young racer in motorsports these days? It just doesn't happen. And he learned his wares here with the SCCA. He's now going to be in a Michelin Pilot Challenge Porsche for the next 3 years. And of course, that puts him at the racetrack so he can do the big IMSA races if they need, if they need a guy with a helmet, he'll be there for that. So these opportunities do exist. It comes with a lot of hard work and a lot of other stuff. It just doesn't happen. But I feel like Greg and Brendan, we're now in a spot where there's a bit of relevance again. Unmute, Greg.
Hey, how about that?
Hi, Greg.
Hi.
Welcome back.
It's been so long since I've been in a meeting. Anyway, so I think, and I don't want to put this all on one group or one person and say, thank you, manufacturer M, for your ladder program. But I think what we are seeing is a lot of drivers come up through karting, now coming up through sim racing, as you mentioned, your sponsor Ray Esports, and getting behind the wheels of cars, and there being a way for them to move up in road racing. And whereas in past, it was always assumed, at least with racing here in the U.S., that the ladder was always in Formula cars, right? And maybe you'd get an Indy Lights ride, and you'd end up in Indy cars, and that's assuming you weren't doing roundy round stuff. But I've had a chance the last couple of years to watch the different shootouts that Mazda holds for. To place drivers in seats in SMX, in what was previously Spec MX5 Challenge, and also in MX5 Cup. Right. And not only, for example, we're going to have this year racing in SMX, Vinny Miskelis, Joey Andrews, Emmy Kissick. Some of them have come out of Spec Miata. Some of them have come out of other disciplines, where they've raced Mazdas before. And just like there are going to be racers in MX5 Cup, I think of Ashlyn Speed in particular, who didn't come up racing tin top cars. She came up racing Formula Mazdas in SCCA for a number of years, and she is going to have she has won a scholarship to race in a pro series. But I think that a lot of racers now see this as a great opportunity, not only to receive financial backing from a manufacturer, but also, and this is where our broadcasts, I think, do come in handy from time to time, is it is giving you a nice audition tape to go out and show your sponsors what you're capable of doing on track, as opposed to everything being word of mouth. And as talking about these ladders, I want to bring up one in particular that we're going to see at Sebring, who has moved over from open wheel racing to tin top racing. Brian, if you remember 2 years ago, our very first broadcast weekend with Brendan and doing the Super Tour down at Sebring, probably the best race of the weekend was a Formula F race. Oh, I thought
you were going to say that David Hobbs was coming back to go racing with us.
Well, that might have been the highlight of the weekend.
It was.
and unfortunately, we don't have photos with the person I'm going to talk about, but we do have a great photo with David Hobbs. Is that there was a Formula F race between Nolan Allaire, who was coming off of a national championship, and Matteo Naranjo. They, I think, swapped the lead in this 35-minute race somewhere like 14 or 15 times, and still managed to outpace the rest of the Formula F field, I think, by about 15-20 seconds. It was absolutely an amazing race to watch. Matteo Naranjo went on this past season in 2024 to win the FRP, that's the Formula Race Productions Pro Championship in F2000. He was also, I believe, your Super Tour points champion in Formula F in 2024. He had announced, and he's on the entry list for Sebring, and again, technically, we'll see him in a couple days over at Homestead as well. Matteo Naranjo is racing in SMX this year, and I think that says a lot for where these up and coming racers see where the opportunity is for them to advance up a ladder and progress from club racing to pro racing.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nolan Allaire is one that we talked about. He is in now the Road to Indy
Yes.
ladder. So there's a lot of opportunities out there, and that's one of the things I'm really excited about.
Yeah. I do want to make one quick point. I think it's easy to focus in on the contributions that Mazda makes and Mazda Motorsports makes to amateur racing and providing young drivers an opportunity to enter a motorsports ladder by means other than just having a bunch of money, right? Which is a lot of times what it takes in open wheel racing, because the low rungs of the ladder are already very expensive. Yeah. FE2 is designed to combat that in some way. Obviously, FF, F1600, whatever you'd like to call it, was that way for a long time. But in almost every category of racing in the history of racing, it's spent itself out of existence. And it gets very difficult to do that unless you have real interest in maintaining sustainability. And I think one of the things the club is doing well is forcing that sustainability and creating those ladders, whether it's on the open wheel side for people like Nolan Allaire, or now for Matteo Naranjo to go tin top racing and enter the Mazda ladder. I think is really cool.
Yeah.
The other thing I think is really cool that is outside of manufacturer interest specifically is what the SCCA has done to provide drivers, and young drivers especially, resources, not financial resources, but the resources to learn how to go racing, right? Being a racing sanctioning body requires structure. It requires a system of consistent and understandable penalties to be applied in racing, against racing conditions, using the judgment of people who have a lot of experience either driving cars or watching cars going around in competitive circumstances. But the introduction of the class ambassador last year for the SMX class, among others, I think what that did was to provide somebody who was high on knowledge, high on experience, and high on the ability to reach people, but was low on power and impact, right? That was somebody that you could ask questions of. It was usually Greg and me, but we had a number of other faces throughout the year as well. You could go and ask questions of, right? Or before you had to go and answer to a steward or a race director, somebody that could help you understand, okay, here's what they're looking at. Here's what we think happened or what we saw happen. Here's how you can learn before you ever have to go explain to yourself or explain to somebody what you think happened, right? And I think providing that sort of that base of knowledge that was free from the fear of punishment before you ever went in front of a steward, I think is a tremendous, tremendous way for young drivers to really take a step back and take advantage of the decades of experience that members of the SCCA have in a way that helps them not just avoid getting in trouble, but really actually helps them become better, more conscientious racers, and therefore more competitive and just better drivers in the long run. And I think the SCCA deserves a lot of credit for having done that last year, because it made a difference in the long run for sure.
Very well said. Very well said. All right, let's wrap this thing up. We've got a new season coming ahead, but I want to take one moment to look back at 2024. I want to ask each of you, and then we got a little remembrance we're going to do at the end as well. But before we get to that, I want to ask each of you what was the one thing that stood out in your mind in 2024 across our 10 weekends, our 20 races, our 200 hours. It felt like 2,000 hours sometimes. Our 200 hours of race coverage. Is there one? Well, there were many moments, but I've asked each of us to pick one of them that sticks out to talk about. Let's start with Greg.
Okay. So I think I might have already shot my shot here speaking about SMX. And this is not like one race or one event, but having watched SMX when it was known as Spec MX5 Challenge, and the challenge that they had prior to 2024, where they raced with multiple organizations, not only the SCCA, but other sanctioning bodies, there wasn't always a lot of consistency. There wasn't always, as Brendan talked about, for example, the class ambassador program. It was, I think, racing that maybe needed a little cleaning up. And in becoming an SCCA recognized national class, I think a lot of that happened. There was, from an institutional standpoint, obviously we had a lot of support from Mazda. Justin Corneliuson has done a yeoman's job from keeping keeping not only the ship afloat, but keeping it at top speed. We talked about the tire marking program, the mandatory data program, where data is analyzed after every single race event, actually after every single race, every single session, and drivers are then given information on how they are doing in comparison to the whole rest of the field and how their car is doing, and how equalized each individual chassis is. But we saw some great racing, not only from some very young racers, but from some not very young racers as well. I talked about Naranjo moving over to SMX. Brian, one of your sponsors, Dave Paterick, has been racing in SMX. He started, I think, last season at Road Atlanta, and he is racing again this year. This is a GT1 national champion that sees the future of this class and the type of racing that it embodies. And I think in many ways, it is a good model for the rest of the SCCA road racing program. But again, it has shown as a way for up and coming racers to really stand out on a national stage. And I mentioned the 3 shootout winners, but there are many other folks that last season really stood out. The Ethans, Ethan Lampy, Ethan Jacobs, who finished first and second at the runoffs. There were so many first-time race winners over the course of the season, and it is a group. It is a class that I look forward to their races each and every event.
Absolutely. Brendan, you're up next.
Yeah, so this one took a bit of thinking, but I decided to start at the end of the season and work backwards. And I think I only had to go to about Group 2B of the June sprints to find mine, and that was the culmination of the regrowth, I guess, of B-Spec up to the June sprints last year. We talk about community and community involvement. The B-Spec community is highly, highly organic. That is a class that was once a pro class and is now kind of free from that manufacturer meddling or manufacturer promotion, depending on what angle you'd like to take there. But a class that was, kind of gets kind of a side eye for being the slowest class of SCCA club racing, and some of the uglier cars, depending on your perspective and what you like. They were able to build that class out to the point that it had to be split from the production cars at the June sprints last year. A full field of, I think it was close to 40, either just one side or the other of 40 cars, ended up getting that group its own class. And the reward and the payoff for all of that, being in its own group, was that we got an absolutely tremendous race on Sunday morning. Yeah. Saturday was incredibly wet and painful. We all have, much like Button Willow 2023.
Don't tell Eric Yeagle it was painful. He loved it.
We're all going to come away from the 2024 sprints with memories, for better or for worse. But that B-Spec Sunday race is one of the finest displays of single class racing I've seen in the SCCA. When we have the opportunity to see it, drying track, passes back and forth. It was exceptionally clean right up until turn 13, 14 of the last lap. We got a little bit of contact. A last lap last corner pass ended up deciding everything for the win, kind of turned the top 5 on its head. And we all went away from that going, you know what? Could it have been cleaner? Maybe a little bit, but man, that was fun.
Yeah.
It was fun. And I don't think anybody came away from that race or that weekend with any kind of hurt feelings. And for me, it was just a really, really cool showcase of what the SCCA is about, from the community building aspect of it, going into the weekend, to the absolute, do or die last corner, last lap move on Sunday morning.
Absolutely. Mine is from Mid-Ohio. We had a great weekend at Mid-Ohio. Gregg, unfortunately, wasn't with us, but it was a fun weekend. The Super Tours returned to Mid-Ohio. And we had an incident in one of the Formula V races. Bill Stasinski ended up taking a heck of a tumble. And that wasn't the moment that I was excited about to talk about, was his tumble. But what I am excited about to talk about is, as we were waiting to hear about how he was doing and all of that situation, we got a note in our chat, and Brendan remembers it. It was from Bill's son. I think it was Dan, and he jumped in to tell us that Dad's okay, bumped and bruises, and then even a little while later, Bill got in the chat himself and gave us an update about how he was doing. And it just hit me like, wow, what we do it's been noticed. And people are like, we got to get in the chat to let people know that Dad's okay, because people are asking and people at home are watching. And that's when it all came kind of like full circle for me, that the work that we're doing, which is fun. It is not work. Any day I can go to the racetrack is not work. But what we do means something to people, and the people who are watching are interested in it, and we get more and more feedback, more and more engagement from the teams, which I would encourage everybody to do in 2025, to be able to reach out to Gregg or Brendan or I during the race weekends and give us information about what your drivers and teams are going through and doing, so we can share it with people. But that moment was like a big moment for me when the family started jumping in to give us updates, because usually we can't, we don't talk about anything till we know for sure, until the SCCA tells us something official. And sometimes that doesn't happen until the next day even. And I always feel like bad that I couldn't tell the people at home what happened. Well, in this particular situation, the family jumped in to share with the people at home, and I just thought that was a fantastic moment. So, all right. I think we've come to the end. Brendan, you asked me to give a few minutes for this, and it's absolutely the right thing to do. We do want to talk about a couple of people who were really important to us last year who aren't going to be with us this year.
Yeah, racing is highly personal, right? I remarked on this at the end of every Super Tour up at Road America when I have my opportunity to make some thank yous. Sometimes you can get romantic about motorsports. Sometimes it can bite pretty hard. But it's ultimately all about the relationships you make. And in this past year, we've lost two people that were part of the Super Tour in various ways. We've lost more than that, but really two that stand out. The first one, and I think also chronologically the first, was Rusty Bell. Rusty was not a long-term participant in the Super Tour, although he was a long-time SCCA racer, and obviously one of the voices, if not the primary voice, up at the Mid-Ohio Sports Car Course. We had the privilege of working with Rusty at this year's Super Tour in their return to Mid-Ohio back in May. For me personally, my best friend grew up very close to Mid-Ohio. It was his home track, and he would always tongue-in-cheek refer to cars making their way up into the keyhole turn, which was one of Rusty's kind of signature phrases. Yeah. And when I had my first trip out to Mid-Ohio as a corner marshal back in 2011, I had kind of a wry smile on my face as I heard that over the PA. And it became my goal as we got into club racing to be able to meet Rusty and work with Rusty, just because it was kind of a full circle moment for me. And I got to share a beer with him this year at the Super Tour after party on Saturday. I've got a great picture of the two of us.
I remember you sending a photo of him to me during that weekend. Yeah,
I genuinely cherished that photo. Rusty was a super guy. He was so professional and very complimentary. He came to us very directly and said, listen, we've worked with some production organizations that it can be a little dicey. We didn't really have any expectations for you guys, but we all had a great time this weekend and we'd love to do it again. Obviously, Rusty having passed recently after a short illness, we don't get that opportunity, but it was a real honor and a privilege to be able to work with Rusty earlier on this year.
Yeah,
the second. Go ahead.
Real quick, just on that note, I also, we went into that and none of us had worked together before. And whenever I sit next to somebody new, there's always kind of like a feeling out process. Where does he like to talk? Where do I like to talk? How do we make ourselves work together? And I think it took us like 3.5 minutes in the first race, or the first qualifying session, to find a rhythm to work together. And then I think, he went and told Tom, oh, this is going to be okay. And the whole weekend was spectacular. And he laid the groundwork, the foundation in that first couple of sessions for that. And I will absolutely miss sitting next to him this year when we go back to Mid-Ohio. But yeah, absolute professional, and the fact that I was able to have just one weekend working with him is a weekend I will cherish for a long time.
Yeah. The second name it hits a little closer to home for most of us, I think, and that was the recent passing of Mike West, who was a long-time race director as part of the SCCA Super Tour. It was not necessarily expected that Mike would have been a slam dunk to return to the Super Tour this year because he had already done 2 years, but it sounded like so great were the returns for the club on having Mike involved that he was set to come back and be a part of the Super Tour again in 2025. Mike took ill at the runoffs, put up a valiant fight in his recovery, but ultimately succumbed to the situation that occurred up there at the runoffs, and leaves his wife Bonnie behind. We spent a lot of time with Mike on the road. There are a lot of mornings, catching up in the trailer before cars went on track. A lot of meals and drinks shared together at restaurants all over the country, literally all over the country. And the one thing that really struck me about Mike is sometimes I think the higher up you get and the bigger your title gets, the more the power trip can go to your head. It doesn't for everybody. In fact, you trust the people that it doesn't. And that was always Mike. Mm-hmm. It never, ever crossed my mind that Mike had anybody but the racers and the participants' best interests at heart. He wasn't interested in throwing a book at people. He was interested in educating people. Right. Even when I asked questions like, "Hey, Mike, what did you guys see as part of this incident, or what did you end up doing to as part of this contact, or whatever the case might be?" Even to me, in a short 2 or 3 minute window, he would explain exactly what they saw, exactly what his thought process was, exactly what the GCR said, and exactly what he told the driver to help them be better next time.
Right.
There was no judgment. It was he was professional and personal all at the same time. I am going to miss Mike tremendously. Yeah. I so look forward to being able to spend time with him again on the road this year. Kevin Coulter was kind of his partner in crime as the clerk of the course on those West Coast weekends. I know Kevin will miss him dearly as well. It's not going to be the same Super Tour without Mike West, and that is heartbreaking. Agreed. So prayers and condolences certainly to his family. It's going to leave a hole behind in the Super Tour in 2025, no doubt about it. But what a privilege to be able to carry his memory into the 2025 Super Tour and to go racing with Mike in our hearts.
Yeah. I can't say anything better than you said in that regard. I will say one thing, though. I'm so thankful for our SCCA family. They needed about $28,000 to get an air ambulance to get Mike home and to continue his recovery and all of that. And that was one of the things that insurance didn't cover. And we put out through the family a GoFundMe and raised almost $50,000 to make that happen, and also take care of a lot of the other bills. Because when you're out at the hospital with a family member who's in a long-term care situation, and Bobby was in Elkhart Lake or in Wisconsin for 2-3 months in a hotel, the hotels and the dinners and the lunches and the food and all of that doesn't get paid for by insurance. And we were able to, through that GoFundMe, help take care of the air ambulance and hopefully pay for as much of the rest of the stuff that went into being there with Mike. And I am so proud of our SCCA family for the people who stepped up, whether you gave $5 or whether you gave $5,000. I just want to extend my thank you. And Bobby has thanked everybody through me as well, that it meant a lot to the family to know that all of us were there supporting them. So thank you. All right. Any last thoughts, gentlemen, before we go?
Let's go racing. We've been at at generating questions and kind of wondering what 2025 is going to look like now since last June, really, when the news first broke and the first webinars were released. We're going to get cars on track here in a few hours from posting.
Yep.
And we get to all learn together in real time. I can't wait.
That's it. And Brian mentioned if you are a racer, if you're a family or a team, you're at the racetrack for these events. Of course, all the drivers have a driver bio that we ask them to fill out for us. But if you have things going on during the course of the race weekend, you can send, and here we go. This is where we're going to get the spam, Brian. Send your emails to supertourannouncers@gmail.com. And because I think we've already said that this episode is pre-recorded, if you have some questions, drop them in the chat. Or drop them in the comments, and Brian and I will try and get back to you and get you some answers if you have them.
Yeah, we'll talk about it during Friday at Sebring. We'll pull up some of those questions. We'll have some time to do that, and we love doing that. So, gentlemen, thank you. Brendan's in Homestead right now as we record this, getting ready for the Homestead races. We'll have all those. Greg and I are going to, by the time this is done, they'll be done, but we'll be broadcasting the Homestead majors before Sebring for the back-to-back weekends. Thank you, Greg, for being here as well. And I'm
just trying to catch up to Larry McLeod.
There you go. I will see both of you in a couple of days.
Fantastic. Can't wait.
There you go. Thank you, Brian.
All right, that's going to do it for another episode of Inside the SCCA, presented by RacingWorld.com. You like what you hear? Subscribe to the RacingWire Podcast Network so you won't miss an episode. Also, the Racing Network on YouTube. Would also be great if you leave a comment, especially if it's a good one. If it's a bad one, leave it on Greg's page. On Twitter, you can find me at RaceAnnouncer. And that would be a good place to find information there as well. There's a new Inside the SCCA every week. As I said, I'm Brian Bielanski. Have yourself a fantastic weekend. Stay safe and go play with cars.
Hi, I'm Dorsey Schrader, and this is Inside the SCCA.